In the 1950s, in the United States of America, a senator named J.R. McCarthy chaired a commission for the suppression of anti-American activities, personally attacking, by means of generally unproven public accusations, government officials, men of entertainment and culture, etc., whom he considered communists, and such as held responsible for undermining the political and ideological foundations of American society. This generated a veritable persecution of people, groups and behavior deemed subversive, even on the basis of mere suspicions, in the name of a dull and, in the long run, counterproductive anti-communism. According to Eleanor Roosevelt, the First Lady of the United States until 1945, it was a veritable wave of fascism, the most violent and damaging this country has ever had. Later on, this anti-democratic political attitude was called McCarthyism, a term that has remained in use in political discourse primarily to denote a climate of generalized suspicion, witch hunt, brought about by ideological positions dissenting from the policy of a political authority that doesn't respect democratic principles. Today, McCarthyism is back in a big way, not in America, but in the European Union, right in the heart of the European Parliament, as evidenced by the joint motion for resolution tabled by all parliamentary groups except ID, in which MEPs call in unison for both European institutions and national governments to investigate all fellow MEPs and staff members who are suspected of pro-Russian activities or sympathies in order to apply severe punishments. The proposal stems from reports in a journalistic, not even judicial, investigation that a Latvian MEP, Tatiana Zanoka, who served several terms in the European Parliament, exchanged emails in 2005 with Russian nationals, some of whom were suspected of being members of Russian intelligence services. This colleague, a researcher in physics and mathematics, who until 2 years ago was a member of the Green Group and has always been active on environmental, social and human rights issues, has the big fault of being of Russian origin, born under the Soviet regime and Russian-speaking, like the 25% of Latvian citizens. As president of the NGO Alliance of Russian-speaking citizens of the EU, she has organized over the years various conferences and events for the appreciation of Russian culture and the protection of the rights of Russian-speaking minorities, especially in her own country, Latvia, which after the fall of the Soviet Union developed, as did other Baltic countries, a widespread anti-Russian sentiment. Because of her positions in defense of the Russian minority, she has been the target of numerous political attacks at home and elsewhere, which have become increasingly heavy as relations between the Russian Federation and the European Union have deteriorated. Yesterday, in the most violent, irrational and unbelievable parliamentary debate I have ever witnessed, she was literally pilloried with the textual accusation of being a Russian spy, malignant and dangerous to the democratic functioning of the European Parliament. Despite the absence of any objective evidence to support such serious and infamous allegations, she was not even given a chance to defend herself against the invectives directed at her with extreme ferocity and shamelessness by many colleagues, except with one minute speaking time, after which the speaker turned off her microphone. It was a shameful, disgusting and devastating spectacle for an assembly that would call itself civilized and democratic. But there is more. During the same debate and then in the motions for resolutions submitted by parliamentary groups, accusations of spying or collaboration with Russian government agents were extended to an indefinite number of MEPs, some mentioned by name, such as Carles Puigdemont, the former governor of Catalonia and leader of the Catalan separatist movement, and the left-wing Irish members Claire Daly and Mick Wallace. Others generically identified as members of right-wing parties such as the FPO in Austria, AFD in Germany, Front National in France, or the Catalan movement itself. All of them being guilty in various capacities of showing by participating missions or events, or by votes and interventions in debates or communication activities, to hold pro-Russian positions or otherwise dissent with EU foreign policy. Also, having staff members of Russian origin or nationality is grounds for blame. The similarities with the McCarthyism of the 1950s are obvious, with the aggravating circumstance that not even in the US, which has sided with Ukraine against Russia as well as the EU, has there been a similar witch hunt, at least to date. In contrast to this hysterical attitude, it is worth mentioning that in all EU countries, Russian embassies are still open, just as the office of the permanent representation of the Russian Federation to the European Union in Brussels is still open. Dialogue with representatives of the Russian government, therefore, is by no means prohibited, nor can it be judged morally reprehensible for any European citizens, least of all for those who hold the mandate of democratic representation of citizens, such as parliamentarians. In the crosshairs of Russophobic politicians has long been, as is also expressly referred to in the joint motion to be voted on tomorrow, the social network X, formerly Twitter, currently owned by Elon Musk, repeatedly accused by the pro-government media and European institutions of spreading disinformation and conveying Russian propaganda. If this resolution is adopted, and it likely will be, this will mark probably the darkest page in the history of the EU, unequivocally showing to the world that the European Union has now turned into a totalitarian-style supranational system of government, in which fundamental freedoms and human rights are recognized in fits and starts, and only when they do not interfere with the political agenda written in far other rooms to which none of us have access. A parliament that uses the slogan of defense of democracy to legitimize the most repressive measures of fundamental democratic freedoms ever seen since the post-war period, and that instrumentally labels as pro-Putin anyone who speaks out against the war in defense of dialogue and peace in Europe, while it calls Peace Facility, a European fund for the purchase of warfare, fully embodies the Orwellian dystopian vision of pervasive population control and manipulation of truth. There is no need to add more, nor to specify that I will vote against this debacle of law, civilization and democracy with no hesitation, with the same freedom of conscience and autonomy of thought that I have ever had on other votes. The main intent of these initiatives, in fact, is just to intimidate those who dissent from the policy line decided by the majority, foreshadowing them with very negative political, professional or personal consequences if they do not change their attitude. As far as I'm concerned, that will not work. I will continue to affirm my ideas to publicly promote dialogue for peace, equality and non-discrimination, to defend the freedom of thought and expression of all my colleagues and all Europeans, regardless of their opinions or political positions, because I still believe in democracy, and I think that if we don't fight to defend it in Europe, we certainly have no qualification to lecture those outside the EU who don't respect it.